This weekend, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers announced that it will not approve an easement for the controversial Dakota Access Pipeline and that it will search for an alternate route than the one that has been opposed since spring by a growing number of protesters at the Standing Rock Indian Reservation in South Dakota. Robert Kennedy Jr. has lent his voice to that protest, joins me from New York to talk about these latest developments. He's an environmental attorney and activist, president of the Waterkeeper Alliance, and the chief prosecuting attorney for Hudson River Keeper. Were you surprised that this decision went your way, Robert?
We're very happy and very grateful to the Army and to the Obama administration. Just to clarify, Larry, the decision is not a denial to the pipeline company, but it's essentially a requirement that the pipeline company do a full environmental impact statement, and that includes the obligation that they look for alternatives to this particular route. As I'm sure you know, the original route, which was 5 miles shorter, would have gone through the water supply for the people of Bismarck. And the people of Bismarck were predominantly white, protested, so the company moved this onto Indian tree lands under Lake Ojai, which is the water supply for the Standing Rock tribe. And the Indians themselves saw this as an existential threat because they've been pushing. The Sioux once controlled all of the land west of the Mississippi under the 1925 treaty, plus Wisconsin and Minnesota, and those lands were slowly stolen from them, mainly by the United States Army, till they were isolated on 3 reservations at Standing Rock, Pine Ridge, and Rosebud. And Standing Rock is one of their largest reservations, and that reservation would be uninhabitable if that water supply became contaminated. So it was part of a sort of a 500-year-old genocide for the Sioux, and that's why you had 300 tribes assemble at the site. But the bigger issue, and the issue that the Sioux have focused on from the beginning, is the broader issue of this being kind of the spear tip in the battle for the soul of our country, about whether we're going to stick with these old fossil fuels that are killing the planet and killing humanity, or whether we're going to transition to a new energy economy, to the clean, green, efficient, and safe fuels, energy sources from heaven.
But for the time being, the protesters have won, right?
For the time being, the protesters have won.
Why do you think the decision was made?
Well, I think it was a really obvious decision to make. Listen, the energy company, the Dakota Access Pipeline Company, was clearly violating the law. The law says that the National Environmental Policy, it's not just a treaty, there's 4 treaties they were breaking, but there's also the National Environmental Policy Act. The National Environmental Policy Act says that if you want to engage in activity that requires a federal permit, you first have to do an environmental impact statement. Now, when Congress passed that law, Larry, they recognized that there were some things that required a permit that were so de minimis and so inconsequential that they didn't want you to go through the entire EIS process. For example, if you wanted to change a piling on your pier, you have to get a Corps of Engineers permit. Do we really want to go through public hearing and comment and a full EIS to change a piling on your pier? Congress said no. For those kind of inconsequential de minimis projects, we'll do a short form EIS, which is called an environmental assessment. But the project has to have no significant environmental impact. That's one requirement. Second, it cannot impact an area that's larger than half an acre. The pipeline company said that is our exemption. Now, this is a 1,200-mile pipeline. Clearly, it's bigger than an acre. It was crossing 209 rivers. If you have a pipeline crossing one river, it's always deemed a significant environmental impact. This project is going to add more carbon pollution than 29 coal-burning power plants. So when they were trying to take advantage of this tiny little loophole and jam this big project into this tiny loophole, they are clearly violating the law. The really distressing thing about this project is that you had a company that was behaving essentially criminally. It was an outlaw company. It was confronting peaceful protesters who all they were asking was that the company comply with the law. They obey the law. The Sioux were extraordinarily disciplined about maintaining the peacefulness, the nonviolence of their protests. You know, when I went to the site, they were screening everybody who went to the front lines to make sure that psychologically and that they had the training to maintain a peaceful posture, even if they were under attack. All of the protests were prayer ceremonies. The Sioux were really disciplined and restrained about how they behaved, and they were assaulted with all of this very highly militarized police force in league with a private army for the pipeline company that was using this very sophisticated new crowd-controlled technology that has been deployed since 9/11. They had acoustic cannons and water cannons and flashbang grenades that tore the arm off of one of the protesters, plastic bullets, tear gas, pepper spray, and that awesome police power of the state was being deployed against peaceful protesters on behalf of an outlaw company. All the Corps did right now is to say, okay, wait a minute, we're going to actually force you to comply with the law, which you should have done at the beginning.
Do you think Trump might countermand that?
I think Trump will want to see the pipeline built, and Vice President-elect Trump does have a $2 million personal investment in this pipeline, but he also is just ideologically, he has said that he wants to see more and more pipelines. But it would be very difficult for the president to countermand this particular Corps action because the Corps has made an agency interpretation that a full environmental impact statement is required. The president does not have the power to simply overrule that determination. Once it's been made, it really has to go through the courts.
Robert, many Democrats have been described as going through 5 stages of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance in response to Trump victory. I could wonder and think what your father, your uncles would have thought of this. What do you think of this?
Well, I think the campaign was distressing. The entire campaign. I think, and I've talked to you about this before, Larry, that this country is a model for democracy. We were the only country in the world that had democracy in 1788. By the Civil War, there were 6 countries that had democracy. They were all modeled on us. When I was a little boy, people all over the world, I remember going to Czechoslovakia and Poland and France and England and Germany with my father in 1966, and everywhere we went, we were met by crowds of hundreds of thousands of people who came out with waving American flags, and they loved our country, and they were hungry for American leadership, and they believed in our moral authority. They understood the difference between leadership and bullying, and they wanted us to lead them. They wanted us to show them the way. And today, I think we've lost some of that moral authority, through a lot of different actions, through the war in Iraq and the torture and all of these things that trying to be sort of an imperialist country abroad, and I think that's very inconsistent with trying to have a democracy at home. And we've lost a lot of that moral authority. And I think this campaign, it was hard to believe that we could sink lower, but I think this campaign was not good for our country. It did not portray our country as kind of the idealistic, optimistic nation that, that ought to be the template, the model, the role model for the rest of the world.
And finally, who do you think he'll appoint to the Environmental Protection Agency?
I don't know. I know that he met with Al Gore and that they had a very good meeting, and that I think that Al was very happy with his conversation. He expected to meet with Ivanka Trump, who is an environmentalist and who has made global warming her personal cause. But he ended up, the vice president-elect, or the president-elect ended up attending the meeting, and they had a very long, lengthy meeting, and I think Gore was really pleased with it. So I'm hoping that he appoints somebody who's more of a neutral figure rather than somebody who is just like a shill for the coal industry. You can't bring back the coal industry. The three largest coal companies in our country, Arch, Consol, and Peabody, have lost 95% of their value in the last 2 years. Everybody knows that this is an industry that is dying and that it ought to be dead. You know, there's now many more. There's 89,000 coal miners left in the country. There's 150,000 people employed in the solar industry. 100,000 employed by the wind industry. These new industries are going to democratize our energy system. They're going to create hundreds of thousands of jobs. If President Trump really wants, I love the idea that he's going to spend money on infrastructure. I think that's fantastic. I hope he spends money building a grid system in our country and building the infrastructure that will allow private entrepreneurs to flood into this system and to build wind and solar, which today is much cheaper than the incumbents. Listen, Larry, it costs today $2.1 billion to build a solar plant. It costs $3 billion to build a gas plant, $3 billion to build an oil plant, $15 billion to build a nuke plant, a gigawatt. We could make energy by burning prime rib if we wanted to. Why would we use the most expensive forms of energy? Why wouldn't we go with local, cheap, and clean? And when we pass the inflection point, wind and solar are now cheaper than oil and coal and gas. And solar has dropped 600% in 5 years. Well, guess what? Batteries are doing the same thing.
We
don't need liquid fuel anymore. We need to transition to a new energy economy, and that's how to restore Americans' idealism and optimism.
Robert, I hope you come back often to keep us up to where this controversy goes from here. Thanks so much.